This is part two of the Isaac Asimov video. The first part is on the channel. You should go watch that if you haven't. The part one is where I talk about the overall themes and philosophy of Asimov's Foundation and robot novels. I'm looking down because I'm looking at the books that I just threw on this chair next to me, instead of piling them up nicely where I could find them easily. Hello, I am Stephen. This is Reading with Stephen. Here I am in the process of reading all of my books from A to Z and then talking to them, or about them, to you in hopefully an intelligent and intelligible manner, because I like talking about books. And hopefully you like reading books and talking about books too. To that extent, please like, subscribe, comment, especially comment. I like comments because if you comment, then it's like we're having a conversation. And if you don't comment, then it's just me talking into the void to myself, which is something that I'm happy to do, but not something that healthy, normal adults normally do. So please help me out on that front, at least. To introduce this video, I have since finished all of the Asimov books that I own, which is all the robot books and all the Foundation books, all 13, 12, 13? I lost count. I think I said there were 13. But to rehash a little bit, I read the Asimov's works in the Hatchet order, which can be found on Reddit by u/Atticador, I think. I left the link in the prior video, so you can go find that. And in that, we read, in that order, you read the first 4 Foundation novels, then all of the robot novels, then the final 3 Foundation novels. So what is that, 7? Okay, so it is 12 novels. I did do the math. So you end up reading 12 novels. I did leave off one non-Foundation / robot novel because it didn't seem worthwhile reading, to be honest, and I didn't own a copy of it, so I didn't care. So in the last video, I talked about the philosophy, the overarching themes. In this one, I want to take more of a deep dive, specifically into Asimov's treatment of women and sexuality, because I think that's interesting, and I think it's really important to do these kinds of deep dives into the books themselves, especially if we're making a 2-parter. You know, in the first, when you make one video about a book, you kind of want to talk about themes and general ideas. But when you're making a second part of a second video on the same books, I think it really helps to go kind of more into the details. Get into the details. And I think one of the big things within Asimov that Asimov does, outside of obviously the big science fiction themes of, you know, what is a human and all that sort of thing, is the way he treats women. And it is especially interesting because Asimov's career lasted from the 40s, the early 40s, to the early 90s. And in that span of time, there's a huge change in how women were treated, both socially and legally, within Western culture. You know, it was at the very beginning, so you end up with the tail end of first wave feminism in the 40s, all the way to the tail end of second wave feminism, the beginning of third wave feminism in the 90s. And you can see that difference. You can track those kind of societal changes through Asimov's writing, and I think that's really neat, and I think it's something worth talking about. And beyond just the feminism, you can start to see how he is thinking of issues of gender, which we today, we contemporary people, are still dealing with. And I think that's neat, and we're going to talk about that. That's what we're going to talk about. So, if that's interesting to you, strap in. It should be interesting to you. Hopefully I do a good job of it. We'll see. I like to think that I can talk intelligently, but who knows? But let's get to it. So in Asimov's writing, there are 4, I think, main kind of women. There are four main kinds of women. There are four major female players. Kind of five, if you include Doors of Anobly, but I don't include her because I think she's just a repeat of a prior character. And then kind of a sixth, but I'm not sure that, again, Fallum. I think it would be insulting to include Fallum as a woman because I don't think she's a woman. She is her own thing. She's her own thing, and we'll talk about her when we get there. But the first woman we want to talk about, and I say woman, but she's 14, so she's a girl. But she is representative of the female, of the early females in Asimov's writing. In the second foundation, we have Arcady Arcady Durrell. Officially Arcadia Durrell, but she prefers to go by Arcady Durrell. We use a lot of D names. So Arcady Durrell is not a particularly interesting character. She is, if anything, prototypical of the sort of young girls' books of the 40s and 50s. Think Nancy Drew or that, and that sort of thing. She is young, she's precocious, she's intelligent, she's ambitious, but not too intelligent or ambitious to, overthrow the patriarchal world in which she lives, but enough to be interesting. She's not like other girls, if you will. She is smart. Now, it is admittedly kind of gross that this young, precocious, beautiful, intelligent girl is 14. That's a yikes. Asimov, don't know what that was about. And it is weird that she is put into a position where she is threatened with sexual violence. Also, that's a big yikes. I don't really know what to do with that because it seems very out of character and out of place. I would speculate, and this is just me speculating, that Asimov is not a weird person. He's not a freakish man. I don't believe he's had any accusations of being inappropriate with anybody. So with Dr. Susan Calvin, we see what I believe is to be the prototypical Asimov woman. With Arcady Durrell is interesting as a figment of her time and Asimov's time in life. I think Dr. Susan Calvin is much more indicative of the way he views women, or at least he views desirable women, in his own words. In his own words, as he describes her in the introduction to the section of The Complete Robot on the Susan Calvin stories, he wrote, The third robot story I wrote, Liar, introduced Susan Calvin, with whom I promptly fell in love. She so dominated my thoughts thereafter that little by little she ousted Powell and Donovan from their position. Those two appeared only in the 3 stories included in the previous section, and in a 4th, Escape, in which they appear with Susan Calvin. You will know, by the way, that although most of Susan Calvin's stories were written at a time when male chauvinism was taken for granted in science fiction, Susan asks no favors and beats the men at their own game. To be sure, she remains sexually unfulfilled, but you can't have everything. I think it's somewhat telling that he has Susan Calvin remain sexually unfulfilled. I think that's a little bit of chauvinism on his part because, as he says, he does, somewhat fall in love with her as a character. And to fall in love with her as a character, I think he intentionally left her hanging, if you will, for his own purposes. Which is weird, but it is something that comes up. Anyway, I don't have any proof of that. That's just the way I'm pretty sure is what happened. But anyway, Susan Calvin is highly intelligent. She is highly successful. She is almost robotic in a sense. She, in working on robots, is herself almost robotic, and is often joked about as if she was robotic by her male counterparts, which is, I think, ironic. And it is ironic because, for the same reason that I said that Asimov left her sexually unfulfilled, at the same time, Isaac Asimov never seems to treat the robots themselves as sexual beings, or as sexually desirable, I should say. Susan Calvin, robotic that she is, or robotic in temperament that she is, Isaac Asimov finds sexually appealing. But robots themselves are never seen as sexually appealing. This is a mistake, I think, on Asimov's part. A philosophical mistake, not a, literary mistake. And it is a mistake because I think that's the very first thing people would think about when you make a robot is, can I have sex with it? Right? The main thing that people want out of robots are human-like slaves and human-like sex robots. Those are the first two things. We all know that those are the first two things. Those are absolutely the two things. At the same time, we know that people would absolutely have sexual ideas about robots. They would want a sex robot. We already have sex dolls. That is something that already exists today. There are many genres of literature involving the sexualization of robots. That is not like an out there idea. That is a very obvious idea. And even Asimov himself understands the obviousness of it to a certain extent, as he would later on in his career, I should specify, in the 80s and in the late 70s and early 80s and so on, he would start to realize that actually people really would just want to have sex with the robots. We see this in the final story, Feminine Intuition. Up to this point in the narrative timeline, all robots were androgynous, not androgynous, because that means neither male nor female. They are androids, very specifically androids, because they are made in the form of men. However, in order to try to sell robots outside of just being slave labor, the U.S. robotic company creates its first gynoid, a robot in the form of a woman. And it works almost exactly as you would expect it to, with men becoming immediately horny for it. So in the story, they are introducing the new gynoid to a group of scientists. So it quote, "Listen, after we were chauffeured from the airport to the main administration building at Flagstaff, we uncrated Jane, the robot, and she stepped out of the box. When that happens, every man in the place stepped back, scared, nitwits. If even scientists can't understand the significance of the laws of robotics, what can we expect the average untrained individual? For a minute there, I thought, this will all be useless. They won't talk. They'll be keying themselves for a quick break in case she goes berserk, and they'll be able to think of nothing else." Well, then, what are you getting at? So then she greeted them routinely. She said, "Good afternoon, gentlemen. I am so glad to meet you." And it came out in this beautiful contralto. That was it. One man straightened his tie, and another ran his fingers through his hair. What really got me was the oldest guy in the place actually checked his fly to make sure it was zipped. They're all crazy about her now. All they needed was the voice. She isn't a robot anymore. She's a girl. You know shit! Because people inherently personify everything. Think about how many people with Roombas, they don't want a replacement Roomba, they want their own personal Roomba fixed because they treat it like a pet. Now imagine that pet, except instead of a Roomba shaped, it looks like a person. you would immediately personify it. And in personifying it, you would immediately start to have people who are weird about that personification. I know that they would be weird about it. They're weird about it with video games, so why wouldn't they be weird about it with a real robot? And being weird and freaky with robots is where we come to our third Isaac Asimov woman. I forgot her name. Gladia. We come to our third Isaac Asimov woman, Gladia Del Mar. Again, with the D names. This is why I got Arcadie's name wrong, because Gladia is much more important. And it is Gladia, by the way, in case you read these novels. Isaac Asimov does have a handy habit of telling you where the emphasis on a name is. Gladia, it is on the second syllable, the D. Instead of Gladia, you get Gladia. Although I suppose there is always the chance that he actually got the syllables wrong, because I did have a teacher once who tried to convince me that water was one syllable. Bad look on her part, but, you know, it's possible that Asimov got the syllables wrong, so it could be Gladia. He could have intended it to be Gladia, but we have to assume that he did, in fact, know what a syllable was, so it is Gladia, which I like better anyway. So anyway, Gladia Del Mar is a Solarian. She is first introduced in The Naked Sun, which is the second robot novel. Not the short stories, but the novels themselves. Second robot novel, and she's a Solarian. And on Solaria, they have developed a culture in which humans never come into contact with each other. Ever. Or, well, very rarely. And pretty much only for the purposes of childbirth. Of having children. Otherwise, they don't talk to each other. They don't talk to each other. They don't look at each other. They don't see each other. They are never in physical contact with each other. They are never even in the same room as each other. Their goal is to remain literally miles apart from each other. Gladia is seen as a freak because she does not like this. She wants to be with people. You know, absolute psychopath. The horror, the disgusting nature of this woman who wants to be in the same room as other people. Anyway, leaving that aside, at the end of the Naked Sun, she leaves the planet Solaria to go to Aurora, because in order to reintegrate with a more normal society, a more normal human interactive society. Unfortunately, having lived the entirety of her life on Solaria, she finds it very uncomfortable to be around people. Even though she wants to be with people, she still finds it very uncomfortable. And in order to get her more used to being with people, her sponsor gives her a humaniform robot. This is a robot with human-like skin and hair, and it talks and thinks more like a human rather than an obviously metallic robot. Think Daniel Oliva. In fact, it is a replica of Daniel Oliva. It is effectively the same robot. They look almost exactly alike. This robot, Gladia immediately starts having a sexual relationship with. As we said, Isaac Asimov in the 80s comes to realize that robots are obviously going to be sexual in nature, and Gladia has sex with the robot. And this is, in fact, the inciting incident of the fourth novel, Robots of Dawn, where the robot that Gladia is banging dies. And we have to find out. And the whole thing is just a murder mystery around that. The murder mystery isn't all that important to what we're talking about. What is important is that Gladia is banging the robot. To that effect, we have not one, but two very in-depth discussions on Gladia Del Mar's orgasms. Now, bring this back to the feminist angle. By the 80s, second wave feminism, full blown going on. You know, it is, society has fully adopted second wave feminism, not necessarily accepted it, but certainly understood what it is. Should I explain what the waves of feminism are? So, anyway, the waves of feminism. First wave feminism is the 19th century into the 20th century. It is focused on the legal rights of women. Women's right to vote, women's right to own property, women's right to be, independent, real people according to the law, not just an extension of their fathers or husbands. Second wave feminism starts in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, gets into its big swing in the 60s and 70s with the idea that women should not just be legally independent, but they should be societally independent people too. They should be able to work. They should be able to have sex if they so desire. They should be sexually equal. They should be legally equal. They should be able to own property. They should have their own bank accounts. They should be able to get a credit card. They should be, treated as though they're equal. And part of this movement is the idea of, what is it? In Tootsie, I can't remember the character's name, but she talks about how I've read the books. I know I'm in charge of my own orgasm. That's part of second wave feminism, is women taking charge of their own lives, not just accepting the way things are, but demanding that they be treated as equal people. In fact, Tootsie is an excellent example of second wave feminism, albeit in a humorous manner. But Isaac Asimov's writing in the second place. Oh, third wave feminism. I got distracted. Third wave feminism takes place in the 90s through the 2000s and is dealing more with intersectionality, right? How are women affected not just by being women, but by being black women or poor women or, things like that. We start to see an sectioning of various postmodern ideas, like feminism, like post-colonialism, like queer theory, and these things start to come together and blend in third wave feminism. Although I think third wave feminism is also often confused with and mixed with post-feminism. Post-feminism is the idea that we are past sexism. We have grown past it. We're not living in a sexist society anymore. Women have everything equal to men. This is obviously stupid. And obviously a dumb idea. I think it also gets mixed with choice feminism, which says that everything a woman does is feminist. Again, obviously a stupid idea. But because of this backlash to feminism in third wave feminism, with post-feminism and choice feminism, you start to develop into fourth wave feminism, which is where we are now. This starts in the 2010s and deals a lot with the shortfalls of second and third wave feminism. Most notably, the Me Too movement discusses not just women should be sexually equal, but they should be not seen as sexual targets either. It's okay for a woman to have sex, but it is not okay for a woman to be raped, to be sexually assaulted, to be seen as a target of sexual assault either, right? We need to overcome the way society treats women, not just as sexual beings, but as sexual targets. So now that we understand the waves of feminism, we can see that Isaac Asimov in the 80s is clearly writing about it within the culture of second wave feminism. A second wave feminism that is promoting women's taking an active role in their own lives. And while Asimov would not be like the perfect example of feminist theory. If you were to read feminist theoreticians at the second wave feminist theoreticians, he's not a perfect example of this. Obviously, he's a man. He's not going to be able to portray it very well. He is, I think, an excellent example of somebody of how society is viewing second wave feminism and how society is starting to begin to treat women. And he, as Asimov, is having his women act in light of second wave feminism. To that end, Gladia Del Mar has not one, but two fairly lengthy discussions about her own orgasm. Which, one, good for her, happy for her, thrilled that she's getting her jollies off. And two, I don't think that we really needed that. And I don't mean that in like a sort, like in a puritanical, like, ew, sex is bad. I mean that it is in a, maybe we didn't need 50 pages on this. There has to be some midway point between puritanism of no, sex is bad, sex is evil, and maybe we don't need this. maybe we don't need to go full penetrative sex either, right? Not that we're getting that per se. She's not describing her sexual exploits. She is merely describing her feelings about them. Which again is not bad. It is a good thing. It is a good thing to talk about sex openly, and it is especially a good thing, I think, to talk about female sexuality in an open and honest way. However, to do so in a science fiction murder mystery is weird. That's weird. That's a weird choice on Asimov's part. I think these conversations are important. I think these discussions are good. I think it's weird that we did them where we did them. That's the problem. That's the problem I have with it. I will try to read some of the quotes to you, but I will say that while I do believe that we should be open and honest about quotations in books and we should not censor ourselves, I do think that I have to self-censor to a certain extent because it's just a lot. Anyway, speaking of her time on Solaria, Gladia refers to it, as I look back on it, I can see that the sexual experience was perfunctory and mechanical. I never had an orgasm, not once. That such a thing existed, I gathered from some of my reading, but the descriptions merely puzzled me, and since they were to be found only in imported books, Solarian books never dealt with sex, I could not trust them. I thought they were merely exotic metaphors. This version of Gladia on Solaria is meant to mimic the sort of feminine guardianship of sexuality that you see in the prior to first wave feminism, or during first wave feminism, I suppose. This idea that women don't even know what sex is, that they are unaware. Gladia comes out, feels very embarrassed over her own sexuality. She feels very embarrassed about her body. She doesn't even fully understand herself. And it is only later on, through the touch of a man, that she comes to learn about herself. But that's neither here nor there. Well, not through the touch of a man, as it turns out, through the touch of a robot. Because later, when she is on Aurora, talking about her relationship with Jander, she describes her first encounter with him as such. In order to make him clothes, she says, that meant measuring him quite accurately, since I intended to have my designs made to order, and that meant having him remove his clothing in stages. He did so, and it was only when he was completely unclothed that I quite realized how close to human he was. Nothing was lacking, and those portions which might be expected to be erectile were, indeed, erectile. Indeed, they were under what in a human would be called conscious control. Jander could tumesce and detumesce on order. He told me so when I asked him if his penis was functional in that respect. I was curious, and he demonstrated. You must understand that, although he looked very much like a man, I knew he was a robot. I have certain hesitation about touching men, you understand, and I have no doubt that played a part in my inability to have satisfactory sex with the Rorans. But this was not a man, and I had been with robots all my life. I could touch Jander freely. It didn't take me long to realize that I enjoyed touching him, and it didn't take Jander long to realize that I enjoyed it. He was a finely tuned robot who followed the 3 laws carefully. To have failed to give joy when he could would have been to disappoint. Disappointment could be reckoned as harm, and he could not harm a human being. He took infinite care then to give me joy, and because I saw in him the desire to give joy, something I never saw in Auroran men, I was indeed joyful, and eventually I found out to the full, I think, what an orgasm is. I'm happy for Lydia. I really am. Wonderful. I'm glad that she has found the full sexual spectrum for herself. Or she's starting to find the full sexual spectrum for herself. However, I do want to go back to that one tiny point. That Jander Bennell literally had to give sexual pleasure to her. Did she rape the robot? That's my question. And therein lies, I think, the next question that I have about these robots, or well, really an extension of the question I have about these robots is, when we talk about what is and is not a person, can the robots be considered equals to people if they are tied down by the 3 laws of robotics? Now, I talked in depth about the 3 laws of robotics in the first part, so I'm not going to rehash that here. Is it sexual assault to tell a robot to have sex with you? Because a robot can't consent. Not in the way we think about it, because it literally cannot say no. Yeesh. That's yeesh. I'm not so sure about this. Because I don't know what to think about this. This is asked a question which I don't think Isaac Asimov really knew he was asking. I don't think Isaac Asimov considered robots people. He never really considered robots people. Even Daniel Olivaw, who appears in more books than any of his other characters, Daniel Olivaw is always there. I don't think he ever considered them people, or at least he kind of sidesteps the issue, but you can't sidestep the issue when it comes to this. If a robot is a person, and you tell the person to have sex with you, and the robot can't say no, you order it, that's rape, right? We all know that. That's a sexual assault. But if a robot is not a person, then it's not. So it behooves us to understand the question of, is a robot a person? And I don't think there's an answer to that. And that makes me feel very uncomfortable. I brought this up. I don't have an answer. I really don't. I really am. I don't have anything. I don't know if this is kosher or not. I don't know if it's okay to have sex with a robot because a robot can't consent. But does a robot need to consent if it's because is it a person or isn't it? This is part of why in the first part, I got very heated. I don't know, maybe not heated, but I got very passionate about the problems with having robots be a stand-in for racial oppression in America. Because, or at least in Western society, not just America, but in all of Western society, because black people are people, robots might not be people. Right? Because robots are ingrained with the 3 laws of robotics. They cannot break the 3 laws of robotics. if they can't break the 3 laws of robotics, are they people? Are they people? I mean, you sit there and be like, well, people also follow laws. They follow rules. They have moral codes that they don't break. And this is true. And I don't know. I feel like it's not okay. I would hazard that the robots are people and that, therefore, it is not okay to treat them as sex objects. Which is... Because the irony is that Isaac Asimov is starting to understand second wave feminism. He is starting to treat women as their own being, as their own sexual being, as their own independent being. But ironically, he has not developed the intersectionality of third wave feminism, so we don't get the discussion of, well, isn't a robot a person? And therefore, can't a robot... Wouldn't it be bad to have sex with a robot non-consensually? And this is where science fiction is great. To be honest, this is amazing. I know I seem very upset by this, and to a certain extent I am. But also, this is the kind of shit that I love. Science fiction, speculative fiction. This is where speculative fiction shines, is that in the what ifs, the philosophical debates. And Isaac Asimov accidentally fell into one. Yeah. Isaac Asimov, one of the most famous speculative fiction writers, made a fascinating what if scenario and didn't even know it. And I think that's great. Continuing on to our discussion, we have our next woman, which is Bliss. Bliss is first introduced in Foundation's at the very edge, is first introduced in Foundation's Edge at the very end. Nailed it. She is a part of a hive mind, or planet-sized hive mind called Gaia. Now, you might be thinking, hive mind, that's bad. They're not the Borg. They're not evil. That's not an evil hive mind. It's a good hive mind, where they treat... It's sort of a Buddhistic version of a hive mind, where everything has reached samsara. Like, it's the idea of a universal consciousness in which everything is connected to everything. People, animals, trees, rocks, everything has a certain level of consciousness, and it is all connected within Gaia. And Bliss is a member of that, is part of that. It's a very confusing system because Bliss is an individual person, but is also part of the hive mind. So it is both individual and group. This is where a lot of the issues in the Foundation's Edge and Foundation Earth come from, because Gaia wishes to expand to not just have its own world, but to expand into the entire solar system and include everything within itself as Galaxia. And Isaac Asimov pretty much seems to agree with that. That seems to be something that he is looking forward to, albeit something that he could not finish because he died before he wrote any more Foundation books. We wrote the 2 prequels, but he died before he could write any more sequels to the Foundation books. So we are left with Foundation and Earth as the end, where the main characters agree that Galaxia would be the end point of the universe. Ironically, meaning that the entire Foundation series up to that point is pointless because the Foundation will cease to exist in lieu of Galaxia. As I have said before, Isaac Asimov's career was very long. And because it was long, I think he just changed his mind about a lot of stuff. Foundation was both the first thing he worked on and the last thing he worked on, and I think he had a lot of philosophical changes throughout. But again, that is unimportant for our discussion on women, because we want to talk about Bliss. Now, Bliss is a very openly sexual woman. She is she is hot, she is almost always in a state of undress, and she's very open about sex and having sex and everything. This is well and good. It's in line with how we understand Isaac Asimov. In line with Isaac Asimov's understanding of second wave feminism. Unfortunately, Isaac Asimov, still a man, because Bliss falls in love with and has a lot of sex with an old scholastic gentleman. And when I say old, I mean in his like 60s. She's like 20, he's like 60. Kind of gross. I wonder if Isaac Asimov knew any old scholarly men that might wanted to have had sex with a young, lithe woman. I wonder if we can think about anybody that Isaac Asimov, at the end of his life, would have thought about having. The reason I bring up Bliss, however, is because despite how modern Bliss comes across when it comes to sex and the way that she thinks and the way that Gaia thinks, Bliss still, we still see with Bliss the limits of Asimov's understanding of feminism. Because although Bliss is this seemingly modern woman, she is still limited in the way she acts to things. She's still very pacifistic, which is not necessarily a feminine trait, but it is more of a feminine trait than it is a masculine trait. And most importantly, though, she is very maternal. Despite her being young and sexually active, by the end of Foundation and Earth, which is the final book, she has effectively just become a mom to a child character that they come across. We'll talk about that child character in half a second, because she is very important. Or it is very important. They are very important. I'm not sure how to talk about Fallum, but which we'll see in a second. But Bliss effectively becomes Fallum's mother and wholly adopts Fallum into her personality. Everything she does after they find Fallum, everything she does has to deal with being nurturing, has to deal with being mothering, it has to deal with her being almost a proper wife to Yanov, a proper mother to Fallum. And this is, I think, the limits, because despite this, despite how far Asimov seems to come, he is still limited by there being two kinds of women: the sexually repressed, in charge women, and wives and mothers. So if Bliss shows us where the edge of Asimov's thinking is when it comes to what women are and what women can be, if we see that Bliss, despite her modernist ideas, still ends up becoming a wife and mother, or wife and mother character, then I think Fallum is an example of, well, where do we go from there? So Fallum is a Solarian, much like Gladia Del Mar is. However, Fallum is 20,000 years into the future from Gladia. So in that 20,000 years, Solarians have continued to develop into a more and more secretive society, right? They are less and less likely to meet together. In fact, I don't think they ever are in the same room as each other ever. To that effect, they have genetically changed themselves in order that they have both male and female sexual organs in order to asexually reproduce, so that they can get rid of that method of having to talk to each other or having to be around each other too. Fallum is a creation of this. So Fallum is a child, and as I don't want to say mutant, that seems mean, but as a genetically changed version of a human being, the characters, Trevise and Bliss specifically, grapple with, well, what does that mean? What is somebody who is both a man and a woman? What does that mean for them? Can you overcome the gender and sexual divide? Now, of course, Isaac Asimov, as a person of the 80s and as a creature of his time, has not or does not understand that sex and gender are separate concepts, because that would be a third and fourth wave feminist idea. He does somewhat grapple with this idea. He does still grapple with the idea, but unfortunately for him, he doesn't have the theoretical or societal, I guess, background to really give him structure to this idea of a person who is not the gender that their sexual organs would have them, that we would traditionally give to their sexual organs, because Fallon has both sets of sexual organs. They would today be considered intersex. However, Isaac Asimov treats them almost as if they were transgender. And they discuss this with Trevise being very bigoted towards Fallon, but Bliss trying to come to Fallon's defense in the maternal way in which Bliss acts. And they have this following conversation. Bliss said, "Don't tell me you still don't like Fallon." Trevise answers, "I neither like nor dislike. The creature simply makes me uneasy. For one thing, it's grisly feeling to be dealing with a hermaphrodite." Bliss said, "Come, Trevise, that's ridiculous. Fallon is a perfectly acceptable living creature. To a society of hermaphrodites, think how disgusting you and I must seem, males and females generally. Each is half of a whole, and in order to reproduce, there must be a temporary and clumsy union. Do you object to that, Bliss?" Don't pretend to misunderstand. I am trying to view us from the hermaphroditic standpoint. To them, it must seem repellent in the extreme. To us, it seems natural. So Fallon seems repellent to you, but that's just a short-sighted parochial reaction. Frankly, said Trevise, it's annoying not to know the pronoun to use in connection with the creature. It impedes thought and conversation to hesitate forever at the pronoun. But that's the fault of our language, said Bliss, and not of Fallon. No human language has been devised with hermaphroditism in mind, and I'm glad you brought it up because I've been thinking about it myself. Saying it, as Bander itself insisted on doing, is no solution. That is a pronoun intended for objects to which sex is irrelevant, and there is no pronoun at all for objects that are sexually active in both senses. Why not just pick one of the pronouns arbitrarily then? And I think of Fallon as a girl. She has the high voice of one for one thing, and she has the capacity of producing young, which is the vital definition of femininity. Palarat has agreed. Why don't you do so too? Let it be she and her. Very well. It will sound peculiar to point out that she has testicles, but very well. Bliss sighed. You do have this annoying habit of trying to turn everything into a joke, but I know you are under tension, and I'll make an allowance for that. Just use the feminine pronoun for Fallon, please. All right. So obviously that conversation, problematic in all sorts of ways. First off, the definition of femininity is not the ability to have children. That's asinine. Obviously not true. There are many women who can't have children. That doesn't make them less women. Whatever. We'll leave that aside for the moment. The definition of what is feminine and what is not feminine aside for the moment. And just marvel at the fact that Isaac Asimov, in a major piece of American science fiction, is grappling with the idea of gender and sex in a way that, well, first off, we are kind of still dealing with now, but in a way that was not a way that people were dealing with back then. And I think that is a remarkable thing. And I think that is fascinating. And what is fascinating is the fact that regardless of the archaic and somewhat insulting terms of which Isaac Asimov uses, he does still firmly come into the idea that in the voice of Bliss, that regardless of what Fallon is, regardless of how you feel about Fallon, Fallon is still a person and should be treated as a person and should be treated with respect as a person. Trevise is shown over and over again to be wrong in how he treats Fallon. And that, I think, is the most interesting part. Is that, again, Isaac Asimov, regardless of sex, of your sex, regardless of your gender, regardless of what you do or do not have between your legs, Isaac Asimov firmly comes on the side of you have to treat people as if they were people, and you should treat people with dignity and respect. And I think that's what a real ally is. You get you have the spirit. Even if you don't have the knowledge, even if you don't have the language, you have the spirit of it. Because that is really what it boils down to, is that that's what feminism in general boils down to, is that we have to treat every person with respect. And it is really, when you get into the discussion of what even is a person, is where you start to see Asimov fall behind. But even still, he understands that while he himself might not get everything, he might not be hip with the cool kids, he might not understand all of the different ways that human sexuality and gender exist. The basic framework is that you still have to treat people well. You still have to treat people as if they have value, as if they are decent people, as if they are, because humans in general have value. They have inherent value regardless of what that humanity looks like. And I think that's neat. That's why I kind of like him. Even if he is a little iffy when it comes to feminism, even if he is a little iffy when it comes to how he treats women, to his treatment of women, not how he treats women, his treatment of women in his books, even if he doesn't quite get Fallon, even if he obviously would not quite get transgenderism, intersexuality, and transgender people. That is the point that I'm trying to make, is that even if he doesn't fully understand women, even if he doesn't fully understand intersexuality, even if he doesn't fully understand the idea that transgender people probably exist, he still comes firmly in the side of they're still people, and we still have to treat them well. And that, I think, is remarkable. And that is why I think Isaac Asimov is a pretty good writer. I mean, not a great writer, but, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed reading it. It was a lot. I regret reading 12 books in 2 months, but I do not regret having read them, period. That's where I come down. I hope that makes sense. Okay. We're finally done with Isaac Asimov. I hope that was enlightening. I hope you will give me your thoughts. Please be respectful. I do my best. I know it was a controversial topic, though I don't know why it's controversial, but it is. Nonetheless, I live in reality. I understand. But that is Isaac Asimov. And that is where we're going to leave Isaac Asimov. We're going to continue our journey. The next book, or the next video, will be about Sherwood Anderson's Winesburg, Ohio. A short novel. One which takes place, one written at the beginning of the 20th century, and has a lot of influence on American modern writing, modernism. We'll talk about it then. But I hope this has been interesting. I appreciate you watching this far. I am Steven. This is Reading with Steven. Please like, subscribe, comment, all that jazz. Especially comment. Tell me your thoughts on Isaac Asimov and his treatment of women and Fallon and all that jazz. And that's it. Go out, keep reading, because it's fun. and it's interesting.